Welcome to True Crime Kin channel, where we dive into real stories that shake the core of human relationships. Today's case is one of shocking betrayal, twisted emotions, and a tragic ending that no one saw coming. So let's begin. Michael had always been a man of routine, someone who thrived on structure and order. After 10 years of marriage, he had thought he knew his wife, Sarah, better than anyone else. Their life together seemed picture-perfect, a comfortable home, stable jobs, and the usual ups and downs of married life. But that illusion shattered on a cold, rainy evening when Michael walked through the door of his home earlier than usual. He had been at the office all day. Caught in the never-ending grind of reports, meetings and deadlines, his boss, Derek, had been unusually demanding lately, asking him to stay late and take on additional tasks. Michael had been willing to comply, hoping that his dedication would earn him a promotion. But that day he had felt an odd urge to leave work early, as if something was pulling him home. When he walked inside, everything appeared normal. The soft glow of the lamps in the living room cast a warm, familiar light. The scent of lavender candles filled the air and faint music drifted from the upstairs bedroom. It was a playlist Michael recognized immediately, a selection of romantic songs he and Sarah played on anniversaries or special nights together. He felt a knot form in his stomach. His instincts told him something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Slowly, he made his way down the hallway, his footsteps barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. As he approached the staircase, the music grew louder and his heart began to race. At the top of the stairs, the bedroom door was slightly ajar, and through the gap he could hear the unmistakable sound of low voices and laughter. His throat tightened. He could hardly breathe. Michael pushed the door open just enough to see inside, and his entire world came crashing down in an instant. There, in the bed they had shared for years, was Sarah, wrapped in the arms of Derek, his boss. Michael's heart stopped. He stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. Sarah, his wife, was having an affair, and not just with anyone, with Derek, the man who had been making his life a living hell at work for months. The laughter from the bed continued, oblivious to Michael's presence. He stepped back, his face pale and his hands trembling. Rage surged through him, hotter and more intense than anything he had ever felt. But he didn't make a sound. He didn't barge in or scream at them. No, that would be too easy. As Michael stood there, watching the betrayal unfold before his eyes, a dark plan began to form in his mind. Confronting them now would accomplish nothing. They would apologize, make excuses, and perhaps even try to shift the blame onto him. No. Michael wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of a quick out. Instead, he would plot his revenge carefully, meticulously, and when the time was right, he would destroy them both. In the days that followed, Michael continued to act as if nothing had changed. He kissed Sarah on the cheek each morning before leaving for work and exchanged casual pleasantries with Derek during office hours. To them, he was still the same Michael, dependable, predictable, and unsuspecting. But behind his calm exterior, Michael's mind was racing. Every night after Sarah fell asleep, he stayed up late researching ways to exact his revenge. He scoured dark corners of the internet, reading about psychological manipulation, discreet poisons, and revenge tactics that left no trace. He wasn't interested in physical violence. That would be too obvious, too sloppy. Instead, he wanted their downfall to be slow, excruciating, and absolute. His first target was Sarah. He knew her better than anyone, knew her deepest fears and insecurities. She had always been self-conscious about her looks, worried that as she aged, she would lose her allure. Michael began subtly playing on those insecurities. He would leave anonymous notes in places he knew she would find them, in her purse, on her bathroom counter, even in the laundry. The notes hinted that Derek was seeing other women, that he was using Sarah and laughing behind her back. At first, Sarah dismissed the notes as a cruel prank, but as the days passed and the notes continued to appear, she became increasingly paranoid. She started scrutinizing Derek's every move, questioning his commitment to their affair. Michael watched with satisfaction as their once passionate rendezvous became filled with tension and mistrust. Meanwhile, Michael turned his attention to Derek. He knew Derek's weak spots just as well. Derek was ambitious, always looking for ways to climb the corporate ladder. Michael began feeding him false information about a lucrative business deal, A deal that, if successful, would make Derek a wealthy man. The only catch was that Derek would have to invest heavily all of his savings and more. Derek, blinded by greed and the prospect of wealth, took the bait. He borrowed money, liquidated assets, and put everything he had into the deal. But it was all a lie. The business partners Michael had set up were nothing more than actors paid to play their parts in the elaborate ruse. When the deal inevitably fell apart, Derek was left with nothing. His reputation at work was in ruins, and his finances were decimated. As both Sarah and Derek's lives began to spiral out of control, Michael knew it was time for the final act. He invited them both to dinner at a remote cabin in the woods, under the guise of wanting to clear the air and resolve any tensions. Sarah, now riddled with guilt and anxiety, agreed, hoping to mend her broken relationship with Michael. Derek, desperate to repair his friendship with Michael and salvage his career, also accepted the invitation. The cabin was the perfect setting, isolated and far from any prying eyes. It was the kind of place where secrets could be buried, both figuratively and literally. Michael had prepared an elaborate meal, setting the table with fine china and lighting candles to create a warm, inviting atmosphere. To anyone else, it would have looked like the setting for a peaceful reconciliation. As Sarah and Derek arrived, they exchanged nervous glances, each unsure of what to expect. Michael greeted them with a smile, his demeanor calm and collected. He poured them glasses of wine and made small talk as if nothing was amiss. But underneath the surface, the tension was palpable. Once they were seated at the table, Michael began to speak. In a quiet, measured tone, he recounted how he had discovered their affair. He described in chilling detail the moment he had walked into the bedroom and seen them together. Sarah's face turned ashen, her eyes wide with shock. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual confident swagger nowhere to be seen. Michael continued explaining how he had systematically destroyed their lives over the past few weeks. He told Sarah about the anonymous notes and how he had manipulated her into doubting Derek's loyalty. He told Derek about the fake business deal and how he had watched with satisfaction as Derek's life crumbled around him. As the weight of Michael's revelations sank in, Sarah and Derek sat in stunned silence. But Michael wasn't done yet. "You see," he said, his voice cold and emotionless, "I didn't just want to ruin your lives. I wanted to make sure you both suffered, and now it's time for the final chapter." With that, Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a small vial of clear liquid. He poured it into their wine glasses, watching as the liquid swirled and mixed with the red wine. Sarah and Derek stared at him, too shocked to move. Michael raised his glass, a twisted smile on his lips. "To betrayal," he said. Clinking his glass against theirs, the poison worked quickly. Within minutes, both Sarah and Derek began to feel its effects, their faces contorted in pain as their bodies convulsed, their throats constricting as they struggled to breathe. Michael watched in silence, his expression unreadable. He had imagined this moment countless times, and now that it was happening, he felt nothing but cold satisfaction as their bodies slumped over lifeless. Michael calmly stood up from the table. He had planned every detail meticulously. There would be no evidence linking him to their deaths. The poison was undetectable, leaving no trace in their systems. To the outside world, it would look like a tragic accident, a simple case of food poisoning gone horribly wrong. Michael stepped outside the cabin, the night air biting at his skin as he took a deep breath, the scent of pine filling his lungs. He could hear nothing but the sound of his own breathing and the faint rustling of the wind through the trees. Inside, the lifeless bodies of Sarah and Derek lay sprawled across the dining table, poisoned, twisted in their final moments of agony. He stood there for a long moment, his mind replaying the events of the evening. The meticulous planning, the execution of his revenge, the slow unraveling of their lives. It had all been orchestrated to perfection. Michael didn't feel guilt, not even a shred. The betrayal he had suffered justified every ounce of suffering he had inflicted on them. As he stood in the cold darkness, his thoughts shifted to the next step. He had covered his tracks meticulously, but there was no room for mistakes. He couldn't leave any loose ends. He retrieved his phone and sent a single message to an old contact, a fixer who specialized in cleaning up messes like this. The fixer owed Michael a favor from years back, a dark transaction buried deep in their past. This would be their final exchange. The next morning, Michael woke up in his own bed. His body was tense, but his mind was alert. The fixer had come through during the night. By now, the cabin and all evidence of his crimes were gone, wiped clean as if nothing had ever happened. The authorities would be left with a mystery. 2 people found dead in a remote cabin. Both victims of what appeared to be accidental food poisoning. Michael had left behind no traces, no loose threads to pull at. His alibi was airtight, his involvement untraceable. Yet as Michael sipped his coffee that morning, an unease began to creep into his chest. For all his careful planning, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was out of place. He told himself it was just nerves, the natural aftermath of pulling off such a flawless plan. That persistent nag gnawed at the back of his mind. Later that day, Michael returned to work as though nothing had changed. People around the office buzzed with questions about Derek's sudden disappearance. Michael offered condolences and concerned glances, but made sure to keep his distance from any direct involvement in the gossip. A few of Derek's colleagues mentioned how he and Sarah had been acting strangely in recent weeks, and speculation ran wild. But no one suspected Michael. Not yet. Weeks passed. Michael had thought the end of his revenge would bring peace, but the hollow satisfaction left him wanting something more. The thrill of outwitting his enemies had given way to paranoia. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes on him. He caught himself checking his surroundings constantly, afraid that someone might have noticed a detail he'd missed. He started to wonder if the fixer might turn on him, use the knowledge of the crime against him. And then it happened. One evening, as Michael sat in his living room flipping through a newspaper, the headline on the front page made his blood run cold. Suspicious circumstances and cabin deaths. Authorities reopen case. The article detailed how authorities had revisited the case after a forensics team found traces of a previously undetectable toxin in Derek and Sarah's systems. The poison Michael had used was sophisticated, designed to be almost impossible to trace. But almost wasn't enough. They had found it. Michael's hands began to shake. His pulse quickened. He hadn't anticipated this. Everything he had built, his careful alibi, his perfect plan, was beginning to unravel. It wasn't long before the investigation would lead them to him. He knew that Derek's financial downfall, combined with the strain in Sarah's relationship, would eventually make someone connect the dots. Michael was running out of time. With the authorities closing in, Michael decided there was only one thing left to do. He had to disappear completely. There was no option of waiting out the investigation or attempting to play innocent. His dark deeds were now too close to the surface. Michael withdrew his savings, liquidating everything he could in a single day. He secured a passport under a false identity, a safeguard he'd put in place long ago, just in case. That night, he packed a single bag and drove in silence, leaving behind the life he had once known. As he drove through the empty highway, the weight of everything he had done pressed down on him. Revenge had tasted sweet for a moment, but now it had poisoned him, just like he had poisoned Sarah and Derek. He realized too late that he hadn't just destroyed their lives. He had destroyed his own in the process. The irony wasn't lost on him. The darkness that had fueled his plan for retribution now consumed him. He had wanted control, but instead he had lost it all. His obsession with revenge had driven him into a corner from which there was no escape. Months later, Michael sat in a small, run-down bar in a foreign country under a name no one knew, his face now unrecognizable. He had no ties to his former life, no one to talk to, no one to blame but himself. As the bartender refilled his drink, Michael stared into the glass, haunted by the echoes of what he had done. Across the bar, a television played the evening news, though the sound was barely audible. Michael glanced at the screen and froze. The story that flashed across the screen was about the deaths of Derek and Sarah, their images appearing in a news segment about the ongoing investigation. Their faces, the faces of his victims, now haunted the headlines again. Michael's heart pounded in his chest as the familiar faces flickered on the screen. The authorities hadn't stopped investigating, and they were closer than ever to solving the case. In fact, they had just announced a new lead, a mysterious fixer who had been involved in helping cover up the crime. They were now tracking this individual, following a money trail that, if discovered, could lead back to Michael. As Michael realized the full extent of the danger, a cold sweat broke out across his skin. He couldn't run forever. He couldn't hide from the consequences of his actions. his elaborate plan, his flawless revenge. It was all collapsing in on itself. In the end, Michael knew there was no escaping his fate. The darkness he had embraced had finally come for him, and there was no running from it. He had thought he could control it, manipulate it to serve his purposes. But now he saw that the darkness had always been in control. Michael drained his drink and left the bar, knowing that he had sealed his own doom. Michael stepped out of the bar, the dim light casting long shadows on the empty street. His mind buzzed with the revelation from the television, the bitter reality of his fate sinking in with every step. But just as he rounded the corner to head back to his small, hidden apartment, a figure emerged from the shadows. "Michael!" A low voice called out, stopping him in his tracks. His blood ran cold. No one was supposed to know him by that name anymore. Slowly, Michael turned around, his eyes narrowing as he took in the person standing before him. A man in a sharp suit with eyes like steel. "Who are you?" Michael asked, his voice calm but tense. The man smiled faintly, taking a step closer. "Someone who's been watching you for a long time. You've been a busy man." Michael's mind raced. Could this be the fixer? Someone tied to the investigation? Or worse, someone from his past who had come back to haunt him? "I don't know what you're talking about," Michael said, trying to control his voice. "You've got the wrong person." The man chuckled, unfazed. "You think you can just walk away from what you did, Michael? The murders, the lies, the manipulation. You think there wouldn't be a price to pay?" Michael's heart pounded in his chest. "What do you want?" The man's smile faded. "You're not as clever as you think you are. You didn't plan for everything, but you see, you're not the only one who can plot revenge." Before Michael could react, the man tossed something at his feet. It was a photograph of Sarah and Derek. But as Michael stared at the photo, his heart nearly stopped there. Standing in the background was a figure he hadn't noticed before. The fixer. Michael's eyes widened. The fixer had been there, watching them during his meetings with Sarah and Derek. But why? The man stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "You thought you could trust him, didn't you? You thought he was just a hired gun. But he's been playing you, Michael. You weren't his client. You were his target." The revelation hit Michael like a freight train. The fixer had orchestrated everything, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. He hadn't just cleaned up Michael's mess. He had made sure that Michael would be caught, that the investigation would lead right back to him. "He wanted you to feel safe, to believe you had won," the man continued. "And now it's time for you to pay." Michael stumbled back, his mind racing. Why? Why would he do this? The man smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. "Let's just say Derek wasn't just some random target. He was more connected than you realized. The fixer. He's been waiting for this moment for years. You were just a means to an end." Michael's breath hitched. It had all been a trap. The revenge he had meticulously planned was never his to control. The fixer had used him, manipulated him into executing a vendetta that went far beyond Sarah and Derek's betrayal. The man took another step forward, his voice a whisper now. "The fixer is coming for you, Michael, and when he finds you, there won't be anywhere left to hide." Panicked, Michael fled into the night, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and confusion. He had to get out of the city, out of the country, far away from the fixer's reach. His mind scrambled for a plan, but everywhere he turned, the shadows seemed to close in on him. As he raced through the deserted streets, he couldn't help but feel like he was being watched, followed. The paranoia that had been gnawing at him for weeks now turned into full-blown terror. He ducked into an alley, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath ragged. He needed time to think, time to plan his next move. But as he stood there trying to catch his breath, a soft click echoed through the darkness, a sound that made his blood run cold. He turned slowly, his eyes widening in horror. The fixer was standing there, his silhouette barely visible in the shadows. A gun gleamed in his hand, its barrel aimed directly at Michael. "Did you really think you could outrun this?" The fixer's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Did you really believe you could walk away unscathed?" Michael's mind raced, searching for a way out, but there was none. He had been outplayed from the beginning. His revenge had never been his. It had always belonged to someone else. The fixer stepped closer, his finger tightening on the trigger. This was always how it was going to end, Michael. In a split second, Michael lunged forward, desperate to wrest the gun from the fixer's hand. They struggled, the sounds of their grunts echoing in the narrow alleyway. But Michael, weakened by months of paranoia and fear, was no match for the fixer's cold precision. A single gunshot rang out, piercing the night air. Michael staggered backward, his hand clutching his chest, blood seeping through his fingers. The fixer stood over him, his expression unreadable. "You should have stayed out of it," he said quietly. Michael collapsed to the ground, his vision blurring as the life drained from him. As he lay there, the world fading around him, he realized the bitter truth. He had been nothing more than a pawn in someone else's game. His revenge had been hollow, his victory fleeting, and now, as the darkness closed in, he was left with nothing but the cold, unforgiving reality of his own demise. As Michael lay bleeding on the cold ground, the night seemed to grow quieter, the world pulling away from him as his life ebbed with each shallow breath. His mind swirled with memories of how everything had gone so wrong, every step he had taken in his quest for revenge had only led him deeper into the web of deceit and manipulation, where he was no longer the hunter but the prey. The fixer knelt beside him, wiping the barrel of the gun with a cloth. His calm, precise movements reflected the cold efficiency with which he had planned Michael's downfall. The fixer wasn't in any hurry. He knew Michael had little time left. "You know, Michael," the fixer said, his voice steady. "Some people think they can control everything. They think that revenge is something they can craft, something they can own. But revenge, real revenge, is a game of patience. And you never had the patience." Michael tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his strength fading fast. His eyes were wide with terror, struggling to understand how it had all come to this. The fixer was right. He had been too impulsive, too sure of himself in his rush to punish Sarah and Derek for their betrayal. He hadn't stopped to see the bigger picture. He hadn't realized that he was being used all along. The fixer rose to his feet, his gaze emotionless, as he looked down at Michael. "You were always meant to be a tool. Derek was a loose end that needed cutting, and you were the perfect man to do it. A man blinded by pride, by anger. You never saw how easy it was for me to make you do exactly what I wanted." A sharp pain jolted through Michael's body, and he gasped, clutching his side, the blood seeping faster now. His vision blurred. But in those last moments, the horrifying truth came into focus. Derek hadn't just been anyone to the fixer. Derek had connections that Michael had never bothered to look into, connections that went far deeper than a simple affair. The fixer had orchestrated everything from the beginning. He had lured Michael into a trap, turning him into the very weapon that would take out the fixer's real target. Sarah had been collateral damage, and Michael was just the cleanup. "I trusted you," Michael whispered, his voice barely audible, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. How foolish he had been to believe the fixer was on his side. The fixer sighed, kneeling once again, almost as if to offer Michael some final words of wisdom. "Trust in this world. You of all people should know better by now. Trust doesn't exist. Not in the way you think. Everyone is out for themselves, Michael. Everyone." The fixer stood, his shadow looming over Michael's limp body. "You should have stayed out of it, but you couldn't let go of your pride. You let your anger guide you, and now look where it's gotten you." Michael's vision began to darken at the edges, his body growing colder by the second. He knew he was dying. But more than that, he knew that everything he had done, the revenge he had so meticulously planned, had all been for nothing. The irony was bitter, the pain even worse. He had killed Derek, destroyed Sarah. And for what? To end up here, abandoned in a dark alley with no one left to mourn him. He had lost everything, and he realized too late that his entire life had been controlled by forces beyond his comprehension. The fixer, without another word, turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as silently as he had come. There would be no trace of him, no evidence that he had ever been there. Michael's death would be just another statistic, a tragedy that no one would bother investigating. Michael's breath grew shallow, his heart slowing to a weak thud in his chest. He looked up at the sky, the stars blurred and distant, like dreams just out of reach. His mind flickered between moments of his life, flashes of a simpler time before everything had spiraled into chaos. His thoughts turned to his wife, Sarah, not to the betrayal, but to the love they had once shared. For a brief moment, he wondered if he had been too harsh, too blinded by his own pride to see that there could have been another way. If only he had looked deeper, beyond the surface of her infidelity. Maybe there was something salvageable in their broken relationship. Maybe they could have healed, could have rebuilt. But now it was too late. All of it was gone, consumed by the darkness that was creeping over him like a suffocating blanket. With one final labored breath, Michael closed his eyes. His body went still, the world around him falling silent. The alley remained empty, save for the lone figure that now lay lifeless on the pavement, a man whose desire for revenge had ultimately consumed him. Leaving nothing but ruin in its wake, the fixer's plan had come full circle. His vendetta, far more intricate and personal than Michael had ever realized, had been executed flawlessly. And as Michael's body grew cold under the indifferent stars, the true scope of the fixer's cruelty was revealed in its finality. Michael had sought revenge, but in the end it was revenge that had claimed him. And just like that, another pawn was removed from the board. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and like this video for more true crime video. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and theories in the comments section below. Take care and see you in the next video.